Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.
A big warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us for the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Here at Australian Book Lovers, our mission is not only about celebrating and sharing fabulous Australian and Indigenous authored books of all genres with readers around the globe. It's also about finding fantastic resources and information for authors looking to write their next book or two or three. And what better resource than getting into the writer's room? And we have some amazing authors here today and ask about their experiences. So this is episode 141, Veronica. My goodness.
Believe it or not, absolutely.
I know.
So, Laurie,
Yes.
where are you tonight?
I am coming to you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country.
Fabulous, fabulous,
Yes.
as am I. So I'm Veronica Strachan, the founder and co-presenter tonight. And hopefully you can't hear my doggies that I just said I put outside who are now barking in the background. But that's the kind of usual thing. So our listeners tell us that they love to hear what inspires the story. We're diving into the thriller writing worlds of
fiction.
Zane Lovitt and Andrea Barton. While they both write contemporary mystery and suspense, Zane with a little humour, Andrea with a little financial education, I think, in this last book. So welcome, Zane and Andrea.
Welcome.
Thank
Thank you very much for having us.
Very good. So, Zane, let's start with you because you're on my left on the screen. Whose country,
Sure.
whose traditional owners' country are you on tonight?
I'm on Warren country.
Beautiful. Same as us. Andrea.
I'm on Boonwurrung country of the Kulin Nation.
Zane, we're going to read your bio. Both of you have given us very short, succinct bios, but we'll go with that. And Laurie's going to then, she'll tell us about your books and then we'll get into the questions. Let's have a look.
Yes.
Zane was a documentary filmmaker before turning his hand to crime fiction. His debut novel, The Midnight Promise, won the Ned Kelly Award for Best First Fiction and led to Zane being named one of the best young novelists of 2013 by the Sydney Morning Herald. And as he mentioned, he lives in Melbourne. There you go. Short, sweet, and to the point. Thank you, Zane.
Yep.
Andrea.
I wish I could dress it up a little bit, but I'm really not sure. I'd love to put something funny in there about myself, but maybe I'm too boring. I could never really find a way to something nice and short to
look,
put in there.
some people we are in fits over their bios because they really are just hilarious. But some people like to tell us their so the technical professional prowess, entirely up to you. It just gives you a little insight is all good. And the fact that you live in Melbourne, we're all pretty happy about that. So that's good. All right. Andrea Barton is an award-winning author and fiction editor who writes the Jade Riley mystery series. Starting with The Godfather of Dance, A Killer Among Friends is book 2. She also runs Brightside Story Studio, a book editing business for fiction and memoir, and is vice president of Mansfield Readers and Writers. Her other writing credits include the Winding Narrative blog, several short stories, 2 picture books, and 9 stage productions about contemporary social issues. She's co-authored and edited 2 anthologies about expatriate life. An electrical engineer turned career consultant, Andrea spent 12 years enjoying the exhilaration and dislocation of life as an expat in Nigeria, USA, and Qatar with her husband and 2 children. She's now repatriated to Australia, where she commutes between Melbourne and Mansfield, as we've just heard. Along the way, she developed a passion for ballroom and Latin dance, helped to build a school, got bogged in both the Qatari and Australian deserts, and had an accidental hallucinogenic experience in Peru. There you go, Zane. That is the hilarious.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I don't have anything like that to put in there. Qatar and Nigeria, forget it.
Now, finally, in high school, she achieved her associate in music for the violin, and she's developed a lifelong love of music. So there you go. And it does look pretty impressive, but you know, that hallucinogenic experience is just a killer. I just love it.
Well, it was an accident, so.
All
Yes.
right, Laurie, let's get the blurbs out of the way so people know the books that
Yes.
we're talking about, because both of these people have 2 books, but the books we're kind of focusing on a little bit tonight are their latest.
Yes. So
suspense
I will
stories.
very briefly mention The Midnight Promise, which is
Mm.
Zane's first book, which is 10 short stories that I'd love to talk about.
Yeah.
But we also have The Body Next Door. So everybody needs good neighbours. When Claire Coral goes missing from her home on Carnation Way, her neighbour, Jamie, isn't too concerned. He's busy caring for his dad, recovering from a broken heart, and eating himself into a bigger pair of pants. Then the police turn up. Is Claire's disappearance connected with the body found next door 13 years ago? Does Jamie's father, now grappling with dementia, know more about these events than he should? And then there's Tess, equal parts mysterious and charming, who just moved in at number 35. As Jamie asks around, an unsettling picture begins to form. Perhaps quiet, respectable Carnation Way is home to the same secrets and heartaches as any other neighbourhood, with a few more murders thrown in. How good does that sound? And I have to say, I jumped on and was able to read a snippet of the first page and immediately went and bought it. So it was
good.
one,
Yeah, that's
one
a
of
good sign.
those books that I thought, oh, okay, yeah, you've got me.
Yeah.
Good.
And we did have 2 copies to give away, Zane, and I think I could have given away a dozen. You know, we had a lot of people who wanted a
Oh,
copy of
great.
that book at the giveaway. So
Oh,
that's
that's very exciting.
promising, which is fantastic. And
Yeah.
really,
Absolutely.
does it ring in your head? Everybody needs good neighbours. As soon as you write that,
I
everybody
know.
goes, yeah.
Yeah.
Of an age.
And then thanks
Of
so
an age,
much
it's
for that,
Sure.
because now I've got it for the rest of the day.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Really good. And you know, I love
And
grappling with dementia. Grappling with dementia. You've got bodies all around the place. Yeah, it's good. Can't wait. All right.
Yep.
A Killer Among Friends.
Yes, A Killer Among Friends, which is book 2 of the Jade Riley series. So, murder, music, and company secrets. Soon after journalist Jade returns from abroad to her hometown Melbourne, her friend Nick is found dead in a dumpster. She turns to their tight-knit circle for answers, only to uncover a web of lies. Mounting evidence suggests her best friend Elena's suicide 3 years earlier is connected. Was she too murdered? As Jade closes in on the killer, she realizes the suspects are all people she loves. Her life depends on knowing which one of them to trust.
Dun, dun, dun.
I know. And book 2s are always super, super hard. How did you go with, I'm jumping in straight away. How did you go, Andrea, with book 2 and keeping that voice in the same space as you did with book 1?
Well, it was interesting because I'd actually written 4 books in the series before book 1 got picked up. So A Killer Among Friends, though it's the second one released, was actually the 4th one that I wrote. So I was very much already in Jade's head. But I did a dramatic rewrite just because I'd written the early draft and then things had changed. So coming back to it after finishing and publishing The Godfather of Dance was really good fun, because I had really got into Jade by then. Like she was very well formed in my head, and I just, getting into her head was not difficult. It was just getting everything else around her and having all these friends that had suspicious secrets and all the rest of it.
Well, if this was book 2 then, but you wrote it as book 4, did you have any issues with paring back any of the information that maybe had come out after 4 books in your head?
Not really, because I rewrote, when I first wrote it, she was quite a bit older, and I rewrote The Godfather of Dance was originally part of the sequence, and I rewrote it as a prequel. So it actually was the first story that made sense. And so then I took the 4th book and rewrote it as the next one. So I could sort of turf out a lot of the B story, if you will, the subplot, and replaced it with a new subplot. So yeah.
Fantastic.
Now, Zane, you mentioned your favourite character to write or hate writing. Yep. Tell us about the beloved Claire. Not so much.
Oh, she was my response to the question of which character do you like writing the most? I mean, she was easily the person I wanted to go back to constantly.
Yeah.
When I was putting the book together, Jamie, because there are two points of view over the course of the book. There's Jamie, who's sort of present day, and there's Claire Coral, her diary from 13 years earlier. And Jamie is sort of kind of pipe fitting a lot of the plot, whereas Claire was just pure fun. You know, she really was. She was such a fun character, and I found myself realizing probably about halfway through the book that I really was trying to write the most likable person I could imagine. She is exactly the kind of person I would love to hang out with and spend time with. She's very warm. She's very funny. She's not very judgmental. She has all the attributes of, I suppose, you know, the most likable person that I could create. Didn't go into it thinking they would do that. In fact, early drafts, she was a lot more nosy, I suppose, and a lot more judgmental, actually. It was as I went along that I sort of came to realize how much I liked her, and that I was really sort of letting that affinity that I had for her sort of drive the writing of the book.
Tell us about the inspiration for the whole story.
Oh, the inspiration for it. I don't know. Look, I've always liked to tell stories with a sort of a chronological schism. My first book is short stories, but virtually all of them are sort of told out of order, out of chronological order. That's something that I've sort of constantly gone back to for a host of reasons. And so I sort of started with I started with that idea. I knew I was writing Jamie. Beyond that, though, when you say the inspiration to start writing it, I had very little. I have always, up until this book, I'd always been a planner. I'd always been someone who really knew the book's details right down to the color of the carpet in the second bedroom.
Wow.
And that was great because it was fun. I really, really enjoy the planning process. But it meant that I took a long time to write books. First book took probably 4 years. Second book took 4 years. And then this time around, I just said, right, I'm going to write a book in a year and I'm not going to have any plan whatsoever. And so off I went with opening the book with Jamie's point of view. I had somebody disappear in the very first sentence. Someone from his neighborhood has vanished. And I just took it from there. So there was literally no sort of preconceived concept. Although that said, I think I did know that Jamie was going to be back home looking after his father with dementia. I didn't know why he was there, but he was a mid-30s guy who'd gone back to the neighborhood where he grew up, and was looking after his father. And I just liked that as a way of into the character, as a way to, you know, put someone on the page who I, you know, had made a decision that I really respected and was therefore, I think if I liked him, then the reader would like him. But that's honestly all I knew before going in. I had no plan. I just took off.
Fantastic. And how long did it take then to get that first draft onto the page?
A year. Yeah, my goal was to do it in a year, so I did in about 12 and a half months. So
yeah,
I was thrilled with that. And since then, I've been thinking, oh, well, that'll be easy. I'll do that from now on. Now it's like 16 months since I finished that one, and I'm still not finished anything. I'm working, you know, I'm getting words down every day, but I haven't found the momentum for the next one. Whereas that one really just took off. I mean, I'm sure it took a while for the momentum to come, but that one really took off after a pretty short period of time.
Yeah. Okay. Andrea, tell us about your inspiration, because Jade Riley, the whole series, been cooking in your brain for a long time.
Yeah, so the series as a whole, in a way, was inspired by the places that I've lived. So you mentioned earlier in my bio that I've lived as an expat in a number of different countries. So my original concept for the series was to set a book in each of the countries I've lived. So The Godfather of Dance is in Texas, in the States. A Killer Among Friends is back in Melbourne, which was originally the last book, but now is book 2. I then wrote another one in between. So book 3 is in Mansfield, which is where I am at the moment. Book 4 is in Lagos in Nigeria, and book 5 is in the Middle East. So that was kind of generically, each book was inspired by place. So for A Killer Among Friends, which was back in Melbourne, it was that whole sense of repatriating. So Jade had been overseas in book one, she's in Houston, and she was moving back to Australia. So there was part of that sense of, and I actually wrote it when I got back to Australia after 13 years away. Jade was only away for a year and a half. But so that whole sense of repatriation is part of it. And do you feel belonging when you come back to a place, or do you feel a little bit rejected by it, or have people moved on without you, or how do you fit back in? And so Jade has a bit of that sort of feeling of being a bit out of place, a little bit of a fish out of water. So that's part of her context. Then the story as a whole was always, Jade's character was always very much informed by the death of her best friend who suicided. And that informed a lot of her behaviour in the first book. And she really hasn't come to peace with that. She hasn't come to terms with that at all. And so in A Killer Among Friends, it was always that thing of coming back and addressing that and looking at that death again, and a current day murder. So when Jade comes back, one of her other friends is murdered, and that calls into question whether in fact Elena suicided or whether she too was killed. So that was always the concept for the book, and where it all grew out of.
And you have persisted, which is always a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Laurie.
So let's talk about then, Andrea. There's been a few, we all know how publishing goes and how it can be full of dramas and things don't always go smoothly. So what's been happening of late, in your own words, if you want to discuss it?
So as I've just described, Godfather of Dance and A Killer Among Friends were put out. They were put out by Wings E Press, which is a small press in the US. And I was busting my guts to get book 3 ready for them, which they were happy to take, which is The Man in the Dam, which is set in Mansfield. And I really wanted the timing to get it out quickly because we've got a Mansfield Readers and Writers Festival in October that I'm part of. And so I really wanted it published before then. So you talk about how long it takes you to get books done. I did this one in probably 11 months. And I wrote it in like 6 months, and then I got beta readers and did the whole thing and had my editor go through it and everything else. And I was doing my final read through. It was on the Wednesday. I was going to give it to them on the Friday. And on the Wednesday, an email came out from Wings telling us that they were going to shut the company down by the end of the year. So I had a completed manuscript. Yeah, it was. It was just like, this can't be happening. I can't believe this is happening in the timing. Then I realized actually the timing was really good because I was ready to pitch. So I had a book that was ready for my publisher, which meant I could just get straight back out there. And different things happened. Like on that day was the very day that Australian Society of Authors put out their thing for pitch. What's it called? The literary speed dating. Literary speed dating. And so because if you don't get in right away, you just don't get in. So that was that day. So I literally turned around and I'm like, okay, I'm putting in for that, and I put in for everything, and I had lists of publishers, and so I just got straight out there. So yeah, and it got a really good response. So I knew I couldn't pitch the first 2 books because they'd been published. So I pitched book 3, and I said in my pitch, this can be book 1 in a new series, or it can be a standalone, or you can have the whole series. So it did get some interest, and I actually got 2 offers for the whole series.
Brilliant. Yay, congratulations.
Yeah, so I've signed, it took a while, but I've signed a new deal with Next Chapter, who are actually based out of Japan. The guy who started it is a Finnish guy, and half of the company is in Japan, part of it's in the UK, so they're audiobook companies in UK. So I've got actually 2 separate contracts, one with a Japanese company and one with a UK company. Wow. But it's a 5-book deal. So
That's
it's the
fantastic.
two that have been published. It's the Man in the Dam, which is the one I pitched to them, and the first two that I wrote, the Lagos one and the Middle East one, will be books 4 and 5. So I'm going to get my whole series
That's
out.
brilliant.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, talk about the dramas of publishing.
Oh,
Yeah.
roller coaster, tears, joy, like just everything in between. It's been a
It's a
lot.
really good example of keep going and
Yeah.
and keep pushing your dream, because look at the turnaround. That's an incredible story.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell it, go on.
I was just going to say, so Zane, what is your publishing story? How did you get pulled from the slush pile, so to speak?
Well, I mean, that's literally what happened. I sent a book into was it finished? Yeah, I chose when I was decided I wanted to write a book. I chose to finish it before I sought out any publishers, because I knew if I got all the rejection letters that you hear so often about from various writers in terms of their fledgling stories, I could easily be discouraged and not finish it. And one thing I wanted to do was actually have a finished product, regardless of what happened to it. So I finished it, and Text Publishing here in Melbourne is a publisher I really I've always really admired, and they were one of the few, from the modicum of research I did, they were one of the few who would actually accept unsolicited manuscripts. I don't know if they still do. I'm guessing that they do. Whereby you send, I think I sent probably the first 3 chapters, and they will have a look at that. And if they don't mind the sound of that, then they'll ask to see the rest of it, which they did. So that was very thrilling, and I was pleased with that, because I hadn't just honed down 3 chapters and then anticipated writing another 7 if I got any interest. I had sort of already honed the full 10, so I gave them, I think it's 10. I gave them the whole book anyway, and they were keen, and so it went to print. I didn't. Yeah, that's about it. They've been my publisher ever since. I felt very fortunate. I don't know how many writers' stories are based on getting pulled out of the slush pile. My understanding is a lot of writers sort of find agents or come through various universities or arts programs or writing programs. Whereas if you want to just sort of come out of the blue like I did, the odds can be against you in terms of this idea of the slush pile, where people just, any random will send stuff in and the publisher will sort of look at it sideways, but will, in the case of text, look at it. I'm very happy to say. So yeah, nothing more story than that, I'm afraid.
That's still a pretty good story.
Yeah, and the story,
I'm happy with
I
it,
mean,
yes.
it's on a spectrum, isn't it? It's like all the way from out of the blue, been working for years, all of those kind of things. But it's rare for people to, just have never written, write their first book and go, yeah, bing, I'm in. So tell us, Zane, all the things that built up to you going, I'm going to write a book. Filmmaker first up, not really what you were looking for, and then switch to writing, or do you still do a bit of filmmaking? How does it all fit together?
Look, stories have always been my thing.
Yeah.
I've always known that was what I wanted to pursue. And for me, I suppose really ever since I was a teenager, movies were probably the means by which I wanted to deliver stories to viewers or to an audience. What happens though is you get a little bit familiar with how filmmaking works in Australia. It's not like in the United States or in the UK. There's a very limited production slate in any given year. Some people manage to break through, which I have an enormous amount of admiration for. But I think I looked at it in the cold light of day and thought, I could hack away at this forever. I could produce a really good script, or at least a script that I was really happy with. But it's only then that the work really starts, because you need to trick somebody into funding it. And then you need to put together a host of heads of department and performers and other people involved in the production, who all need to be at the top of their game in order to make something that's watchable. In other words, there's a lot of luck involved. With writing a novel, I mean, I've always been a lover of literature. I wasn't necessarily coming to it as a stranger, but with writing a novel, it's just you. And if you produce something that you're happy with, none of this other stuff is important. You don't necessarily even need to get it published. You can just have this finished thing. there's no finished thing with a screenplay. Well, I suppose there's a screenplay, but that's really just a blueprint for a movie. So yeah, with the limits that I perceived at the time and still perceive in the Aussie film industry, I chose to basically rely on my own work ethic and my own capacity to produce a finished product. So that's what I pursued, and I'm very, very happy that I did. I've got a lot of friends who are still filmmakers, who are still pushing the bucket uphill. Who are still trying to align all the planets that need to get aligned to produce something, not just to produce something, but to produce something of a standard that gets attention in Australia and overseas. I don't want to say that I feel sorry for them. I feel that might be a bit patronizing, but they are still going through exactly what I was going through up until I guess about 28, 29 years old, where I just sort of thought, no, this is a dark future of even more poverty and frustration that there might be as a novelist. And so yeah, I let that go, and I'd like to think I haven't looked back.
Do you think some of the short stories of your first book was picking up a lot of your filmmaking writing?
Yeah, for sure.
And then, so how was that transition then into longer form writing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I could talk about that extensively and it would bore you all to tears because it's quite, it's very much in the weeds. But yeah, look, the first book definitely, I think wanting to tell stories out of time is something that largely comes from movies and perhaps also TV. It's not something that it certainly does happen in literature, but it's not something that is as significant a part of how standard novels are written, whereas it does feel like it's a bigger part of film and TV. So I know I sort of inherited that from a love of movies. The second book, I think, it's called Black Teeth. It started out as a screenplay. It was actually something that I'd previously conceived of as a film. And I think it suffered for that because when you're putting together a script, you unconsciously you conceive of actors breathing life into your story and breathing life into your characters and making your characters particularly likable or charming or unlikable or uncharming as you may need them to be. And so but if you apply that to writing a novel, you can, I think, produce something which perhaps doesn't have that charm, just in literally sentence to sentence. It doesn't have that sort of charming aspect that a lot of narration has to have, especially first person narration, because I was still perceiving an audience of being people who would like a character based on the decisions that they made rather than like the character based on just how they told the story and how the words that they used and how funny they were. And so that was a real gear shift. And I came away from Black Teeth thinking, all right, I need to be more conscious of wooing the reader, if you like, of trying to produce something that people will have a positive, produce characters who people have a positive response to, or a very negative response to. And it's something I find myself thinking about a lot now whenever I read a book or watch a movie, how significant it is for the writers to set up characters for being likable or unlikable. It's a sort of a new angle that I found of looking at things. In the past, with movies, I think, of writing scripts, I saw that as being, I think it was something that I sort of thought the director or the actor would contribute. And as a writer, I've come to realize, no, I've got to do it all.
Just you.
I need to be the one who breathes the life into it. So that's probably the most significant difference. Certainly, I haven't been thinking about things in a remotely cinematic way since then. And The Body Next Door was never conceived of it as a TV show or a movie or anything else like that.
Okay. Can we switch to Australia for a minute? Because this one, Andrea, is in Australia. And, Zane, yours is in fictional Australia. So we're contemporary, we're crime, we're in fictional Australia. But what do you think is the uniqueness of the Australian voice and setting and characters that we present to the world? What is it that Australian authors writing about Australian characters and settings, as I've said, bring that the world should go, that's what the difference is? Because our books are different. I think. What are your thoughts, Andrea?
That is a really good question. And I think I'm thinking about my two books, because I've got one in Melbourne and one in Mansfield, and I think they bring something different as well, because I think city versus regional, there's quite a big difference in how we present. Certainly, there's a lot of the red dirt crime that we've got in Australian fiction, and a lot of that's based around the landscape. And our landscape is wonderful. I mean, it is full of character, both in terms of the actual trees and the foliage and all of that, but also our animals are so unique. We've got our kangaroos and koalas and all the things you've got around your little screen there. And so we're filled with all that, and then the dangers as well. With you've got sharks and you've got snakes and spiders and all those sorts of things, which always weave their way into my stories. In both of them. In fact, both of them have some regional scenes. Like, to me, Australia, I would think very much of Australia in terms of the bush. But our cities, I guess, have a unique flavour as well. And so for me, with The Killer Among Friends, that was in Melbourne. And so in telling the story, it was, where is every scene going to take place and which parts of Melbourne am I going to represent? And so I wanted to make every part really recognisable. The front cover's got, one of the graffiti lanes in Melbourne in the city centre. And so there's scenes that take place in the city centre. There's a scene on Elwood Pier. So, you kind of get that sort of more suburban thing, but looking out over the water and looking back across at the city and that sort of thing. So I think there's the sort of the physicality of both the landscape and the cityscape feed very much into the story-wise. In terms of our characters, that's sort of another interesting thing. And I think Jade in some ways feels like she doesn't fit in Melbourne in some ways, because she doesn't drink coffee. She doesn't follow Aussie rules football.
Really, from Melbourne? Oh, fine words. I tell you what Zane said here, I had words. Coffee.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly. So mine was kind of, and well, because I don't drink coffee, so sorry.
Neither do I, Andrew. That's all right. I had to give it up.
That thing of, what is really Australian, and like wearing black, so there's actually a lot of symbolism about her clothes. So she wears black a lot, and her mum is the opposite. Her mum's a drama teacher, and she's always complaining, you need to wear more colour and bring out the colour in your eyes and do this and do that. And so there's symbolism in terms of her transition through the story in terms of what she wears, and that, when she does wear colour, it sort of represents something different. So things like that I think filter into the writing that it is kind of deliberate. And there's probably a whole bunch of things that are in there that weren't deliberate, that I probably can't even tell you because I didn't do it on purpose. But yeah, certainly those things that I tried to play into what do you think of when you think of Melburnians, and what are the things that they're interested in, and subverting some of that and showing how that means that she felt like she wasn't quite part of it, and then making other bits where you totally tap into that.
Yeah, good answer.
Yeah.
What about you, Zane?
Sure.
I used to think a lot about the Australianness of what I was producing, how Australian was it, how Australian did I want it to be. And I've sort of let those questions go a little bit, because I think my theory is that they will have an Australian aspect to them regardless of what I do. I'm only writing about Australia. I'm not setting books in other places. In fact, it's all very, very Melbourne based. I think I really do believe that what's Melburnian or what's Australian about the books is sort of there, perhaps without my being able to see it. It is going to be just kind of inherent to it. I do think there's a bit of a hurdle to get over when you're setting a book in an Australian setting. Andrea is absolutely right when we talk about just how fertile the bush is for stories, like going back tens of thousands of years. It's been a place where amazing stories have been produced, and it continues to be to this day a place where so many of our great crime fiction stories, and just generally so many of our great movies and literature is based. And I feel that whenever I pick up a book that's that's set, say, somewhere regional or somewhere in the outback, that it is automatically kind of prescient and urgent because it's such a mysterious place. Still, I think to a lot of us white people, it's still a very mysterious slash kind of alien place that we're still coming to terms with. Aussie cities are a bit different because, in my opinion, they lack that fertility or that automatic interest that I have uh, in a book that is set in the outback. So I know I have to try a little bit harder to try and produce something that is both familiar. Let's say it's an international reader who doesn't know Australian cities very well. I want to produce something that is both familiar to them, i.e., here is a city. We all know how this works. But on the other hand, is something that is particularly kind of Aussie to it. Maybe that's the characters. I think in this case, I was reaching for something that does feel actually particularly Australian, which is our suburban uh, the suburban reality for so many people living in the cities outside of the CBD. Suburbia is very um, it's one of the things that I think we're really kind of known for, or at least a lot of people will picture Australians outside of Australia. A lot of people will simply picture Australians living in the suburbs. We've exported it in the forms of Neighbours. We were talking before about how my book sort of gives the front cover of my book gives a little nod to Neighbours. Uh, it's it's something that I wanted to explore and sort of pull back the facade of that to reveal a body next door and a series of murders. The one I'm writing at the moment is set on a coastal town, which is something else that I think is ready to be exploited as something that people will sort of associate with Australia, but isn't necessarily that hasn't necessarily doesn't necessarily have that backing of that sort of rich literary history that the Outback has. But fingers crossed, I can find a way to make it work.
Yeah. So we've done the Australian voice because we do try and that's what we're about, is celebrating and supporting Australian authors and saying to the world, not all fantasy and Armageddon things happen in the US. Some stuff happens in Australia, and not every. Although I do worry about crime in Britain. How many Midsummer murders would you ever visit? Midsummer, where
I was actually going to say that about all the Australian fiction, because most of the Australian fiction that really gets a lot of traction is Australian crime fiction out in the outback. So I don't know that anyone would be wanting to go out there because people get killed everywhere. But speaking of murders, so you've both got old murders. So talking about both of your current books there. What about digging up the past? What's driven your need to have a past murder and that look back through the characters' histories and where they're grounded and everything, just in regard to having that? What do you have anything in your own past that's waiting to be discovered?
Dig up the skeletons.
Andrea, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I think in terms of my stories, it was because of the series and the fact that Elena was really, her death was Jade's wound, really, from the beginning. So for her character, she really had to go back there. And I think that's part of, as an author, when you're trying to create characters, you're trying to create really three-dimensional characters that do have that history and things that have happened in their past. So that is what makes them interesting. And so going back to explore that is part of the fascination of writing it. So in this particular book, obviously that was huge for Jade. And it is inspired by a current day murder. So there's not just the past what had happened, but there is this current day one. So the current day murder is really what she's trying to solve, and that's flipping her into, there are links between the two deaths. And so that's what leads her to question, well, was it a suicide or was it actually murder? And part of that leads both Jade, but all of the characters to look at, I kind of wanted to explore the issues of mental health. And I mean, we all have people in our lives who've been touched by mental health issues. So that is something very real, and it's personal, I think, to to everybody. And so I really wanted to look at that and that whole thing of how do you deal with a death like that, and how, so everybody in all the, so her parent, Jade, Elena's parents, Jade and Jade's friends, all were looking to what had happened to Elena and what they did and how they responded to it, and could they have done something differently or better or changed things so that she didn't die. And then there's this question of, well, if she was murdered and it wasn't suicide, am I off the hook? You know, is it almost more palatable somehow for it to be murder and not suicide? So there's a lot of kind of really quite hard questions that Jade had to grapple with, and her friends. So obviously I can't say much more than that without giving spoilers.
No spoilers.
But
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah. Insane.
Look, again, I've always loved the idea of having two separate streams in time, not just two POVs, which is what it is, but one being very separate in time. Claire's diary entries are from 13 years earlier. I think one of the things I like most about doing that is just the fact that, and maybe Andrew, you had this experience as well, but it means you can have a lot of fun with where one character is at here and where they suddenly turn out to be in present day. What happens to them in those early, however it's being done for me, it's an earlier timeline. They can present as a particular kind of person, but we can also recognize events that are happening to them here after a period of time, which we're not necessarily privy to. We're not actually sort of seeing characters in those moments, but in my case, 13 years later, those characters have changed in a particular way, and that's a lot of fun. You can't necessarily do that if you're telling a story that just takes place over the course of like a year or a few weeks or even a few days, as a lot of crime fiction would be. So that to me was probably the most fun part. Why go into writing having a murder mystery that's many years old? Look, I mean, the idea of, as I say, clawing at the face of Australian suburbia was one of the things that I got really into with the book. And in order to do that, you are basically going to be clawing back and revealing the past. So that aspect, I think, was going to be there automatically. Beyond that, look, I do love cold case stories. I think a lot of my favorite books about crimes, including true crime, take place over decades, over a long period of time, whereby, as I say, you have this sort of germ of a crime, but it's the ripples of the pond sort of spread out, and you can see, especially if you're using time in that fashion, you can see all the ways that it's affecting people, including over many years.
That's, if I can just jump back in, that's actually interesting. Yours are set 13 years apart, mine are only 3 years apart, which is quite a big difference. But also, I think the fun thing for me was when I was designing that part of the book, because originally I wrote the story all in Jade's point of view in the present, and it really wasn't quite giving enough depth of Elena, because you didn't get to know Elena because she wasn't alive at all in that story. So I really wanted to go back there to get to know her and to explore her. And I had to decide, well, do I do that in Jade's point of view? Do I do it in Elena's point of view? Like, whose head do I do that from? And so when you talked about different favorite characters, I kind of had that experience with this. I chose in the end a guy, Danny, who's one of their mutual friends, who was absolutely besotted with Elena. So I could do this whole thing of looking at Elena through these complete rose-colored glasses, and Elena just takes on this whole new, he kind of elevates her to sort of almost heroic status because he's so totally in love with her. And he was a drummer in a rock band, so I got to play with music a lot, which is sort of one of my loves. And when I was talking with one of my friends about developing it, originally he was going to be a saxophone player in a jazz band, but I have a friend who's called Danny who was a drummer in a rock band, and he said to me, absolutely not, you cannot do it, it has to be a drummer. I said, fine, you let me use your name and I'll do the character, and you have to help me get all the stuff about, being in a rock band right, because, obviously I haven't done that. And so, and he was actually quite big in the 60s. So he was in a band called MPG Limited. And he was a rock star. And So he helped me with write that Danny character. And actually, as I was writing it, I read it to him as I was going, and he would correct me on things as to, because this character was also a bit of a songwriter and how songs might or might not get picked up and stuff like that. So it's not a huge part of the book, but it was enough that it was really fun to write.
That's cool. That's a nice way of doing it and bringing that into the present. So.
And better than killing off people that cheese you off, which we do from time to time. I believe, let me put you in a book and murder you,
That's it.
That's right. I'm wondering if Danny actually did it. I mean, I know you can't tell us, but if you're like, oh, thanks for all your information, Danny. Oh, by the way,
you're the killer.
I didn't want him, and no spoilers, but I did say to him, if we're going to do this, you have to let me do whatever with that character. Like, this character is not you. This is a character in the book, and he's going to maybe do bad things or good things or whatever, but you have to let me do that. You can't.
Take it personally. Yeah.
So it was fun, and you'd have to read it to find out.
Yes, and that is the thing, to read it now. Zane, a twist on the modern notions of romantic love. How tortured they've become by overuse of bad writing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that I suppose I've been thinking about a lot lately. I'm not even sure why, but the idea that romantic love sort of gets talked about a lot. It's all over the movies, it's all over the songs, it's all over TV commercials. It's something that we have sort of taken for granted to mean lots of things, and by meaning lots of things, it doesn't mean very much at all, I think, a lot of the time, or at least becomes a cliche that is pretty hollow. And I was interested in trying to understand, and the book sort of becomes really an exploration on my behalf of figuring out, well, what is my definition of it? What do I think it actually is? And I think the first step towards that was to eschew all this nonsense that you get from classic love stories and from pop songs and so on and so forth, and to really embrace what is the experience for a number of the characters in the book, which is that long-term intimacy and the way that builds up to a kind of, as one character puts it, a kind of constant hum that exists in the background. It's not the passion of youth necessarily. It's not necessarily passion at all. It's not unrequited love. It's not all the drama that seems to go into so much of modern relationships. It's about the exact opposite of drama. In fact, it's about a sort of a calm relationship wherein two people sort of invest in a certain level of peace between one another. Now, that doesn't necessarily make for a great crime story, but it is the story, based on my interest in it, the story takes on that as a kind of background exploration for Jamie especially, but also for Claire.
No, fantastic. Having been together for, more than 4 decades, known each other since school, I'd say, yeah, I like that. The kind of hum in the background, witness to the small things in each other's lives. I think that for me is very important. Yeah.
That's right. That's what the book tries to get at. And to pull back from I think so many people out there consider love to be the demonstration of passion or the demonstration of drama. When there's a lot of stuff, when there's a lot of fighting, and when there's a lot of emotional fireworks going on, that it can be a representation of love. And I'm personally of the opinion that that's a load of nonsense. And so, as I say, once I sort of pushed out of the way all these, I suppose, mainstream or popular ideas of what romantic love is, I then had to sort of say, well, how do I define it?
Yeah.
Which is, it's what the book tries to do.
I like it. Financial crimes. Laurie, before I get back to you.
No, go
Andrea, the research you had to do on finance. And I mean, we could isn't that just a whole genre of its own?
Yeah, look, it probably is. And I mean, I'm not financially savvy. Like, I'm the sort of person who, gets tax time and my eyes sort of glaze over, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, do I have, you can hear the tortured screams coming from my study. So it's not something that comes naturally to me. But there were a few things that happened that kind of really caught my interest. And so one of them was, I listened to a podcast from the Australian Financial Review about the biggest insider trading case in Australia. And it's fascinating. And it's fascinating about the just what they think they can get away with, and what, how blatant it was, but how clever they were, and how easy it was to go under the radar, and how hard it is to catch. So I did a lot more reading about that sort of thing, just because it really, really did interest me. And then trying to come up with different ideas of things that might or might not work in real life. And I do have a couple of accountants in the family, which is very useful. You can see I use my contacts a lot in my writing. A lot of my research is, yeah, exactly. A lot of my research is done in talking to people who are in those professions. And so I came up with what I thought was a really cool scheme. And my accountant brother-in-law was very, very emphatic. No, Andrea, it's not really a good idea. This is illegal. But yeah, so that was, and in The Godfather of Dance, there is a little bit of that as well, as a family that's kind of caught up in money laundering. So in those, it doesn't flow through into all of the other books in the series, but in these two, it kind of, I kind of went down a bit of a rabbit hole with that. I mean, there are other crimes involved in this story as well, but that was, it was a fun part to research.
Love it.
Laurie, your turn.
Oh, okay. So crime, you've got your hero, you've got your investigator, but you've also got your crime committer, your murderer, your killer, your stealing money, going out and doing the long cons, whatever have you. How fun is it to plot or to plan or to write from that? Do you have that point of view come through in the stories, or is it completely cold and it's just your heroes coming in to investigate?
Well, each of my books is a bit different, and it's hard to sort of say some of this without giving spoilers.
Yes, and I don't want that.
But yeah, but as an author, the thing for me is whether I'm in their head or not, that I have to understand them and their motivation and why they've done what they've done. So obviously, I've got 5 books, 5 different masterminds, or sometimes maybe there might be more than one. And so in each of those cases, I want my reader to be able to understand, not, oh yeah, sure, if I was in their shoes, I would do the same thing, but that they understand why it happened that way, and that their behavior may be completely mad to us, but there is a logic to their behavior from their point of view. So yeah, I always think through, like in every scene or crime or whatever is happening, I have to think it through from their head, and it's kind of fun. Like I was saying with the financial stuff, is trying to plot out something that actually could work and how you might actually get away with something, and then understand the motivations is also really important, whether it's a crime of passion, whether it's about money making, whether it's about building a power base. Everybody's driven to crime for a different reason, and trying to understand that it sounds terrible. It's fun. It's interesting. It's intriguing. So I think that's why there's so many crime writers out there, and it allows you to kind of get into and doing things that you would never, ever, ever do in real life, but you can do it in the page, and it's kind of fun and interesting. And yeah, like firing a gun, I actually, that's something there's some gun violence in some of my books, and I actually went out and when I was visiting Houston, we had friends who have guns, because in Texas, of course, it's a bit different to here. So the last time I visited Houston, I got my friends to take me out to a gun range and fired a bunch of different weapons, just so that I could write about it and know how it felt and how it smelt, and how, how the kickback, everyone talks about the kickback and stuff, of how the cartridge pops out the side that I didn't know about. Like all of those physicalities of shooting a gun are just so different to what we've all seen it on TV a million times, but actually doing it is something else. So I guess, that's what crime writing allows us to do, is get into those sort of doing things that you wouldn't normally do, and having fun with it.
And Zane, what about yourself?
Well, with this book, I didn't know who the villain was for most of writing it, so I wasn't really trying to create a particular kind of a villain. I was very much taking that, I suppose, the classic whodunit Agatha Christie approach, which is any of these people could be guilty. They all had the potential to be a villain of their particular own style, with their particular motivations. It wasn't until I got very late in the book when I sort of thought, okay, I need to know who did all this. So I started to figure out exactly who that was going to be. I certainly have a lot of fun having produced villains in the past. That can definitely be, as Andrea says, it gives you a chance to let out that voice that you generally keep sort of shut away at the back of your brain. When you're just like, yeah, he's just gonna kill that guy. It definitely is a lot of fun. But look, it's fair to say I don't really think about villains a lot. It's not really what's driving me at any given point. I'm sure that is the case for a lot of writers, especially crime writers. I'm sure that creating Hannibal Lecter, Thomas Harris was having a lot of fun, and it really was sort of at the center of what those books are. Whereas it's not necessarily sort of how I'm approaching things. I think it's there to be have fun with when the opportunity is there, but I'm much more interested in, I suppose it's fair to say, I'm a lot more interested in trying to tease the reader with, this person could be a villain, and if they are, here's why, and here's how they got away with it, and here's their scheme. But maybe that's just a red herring, or maybe that's just something that the investigating character conceives of, but it isn't necessarily a reality. So it's sort of playing with that kind of tension is what I'm more interested in. I think it's fair to say I'm more interested in that than just creating a bad guy or bad woman.
Cool.
Bad person.
Yeah.
Best response, Zane, you've ever had to one of your books?
I think I may have told you this earlier, but I did.
Yeah.
There was a publisher who I met. He was in New York, actually. I think he might have been an agent. I can't remember. I don't think I had a professional relationship, but he read my stuff. And look, the United States, I think it's different to Australia. They really do blow a lot of smoke and insist that you are the greatest thing to literature. Or movies, and in fact, they will tell you that in the same sentence. My understanding, at least, they'll tell you that in exactly the same sentence where they tell you they're not going to publish your book, or they're not going to continue to work with you. Being overly praising is, I think, just de rigueur. It's just how they roll. So I don't take what this gentleman said too much to heart, but he did say to me that he'd read my book. I mean, he said he read my book, and that was great because this is my first book. Only so many people had read it. I did get it was getting published in the States at the time, but this was before that. So as far as I was concerned, no one in the country had read the book. So I'm like, oh, great, he's read my book. And he went on to say that he read my book to his friends out loud to his friends at the beach. And I thought, I don't know. I don't think it's ever going to get better than that.
That's good. Good line.
I think Spielberg could call me and tell me he wants to make my book into a movie. I'm like, yeah, but did you read it out loud to your friends, Stephen? Because if you didn't, this is all just by the by.
Yeah, I think that into the bio with that one.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yes. Into the bio. Yeah.
There you go.
I have written books that people have read or claim to have read out loud to their friends at the beach.
To the beach, yes.
Maybe I should check that in there.
Come on, throw it in. All right, Andrea, best response. Yeah.
I don't think I can top that. No way. I'm just really happy if people have read it. And the best thing is when people get really mad at me because I kept them up late. And, I didn't get to bed until 2 a.m. because I had to finish your bloody book. That is cool. I'm super happy with that.
Yeah. That is excellent.
Yeah.
So we always ask our writers, this is one of our favourites, what advice would you give to an aspiring writer? Oh, sorry, Laurie.
No, that's all right. We were both in the same. We've already linked. Yep.
Zane, advice for aspiring writers.
Yeah, look, I don't want to be too much of a grumpy old man about it, but I have found myself sympathetic to. I read an interview with Paul Auster a long time ago, and he was asked exactly that question: "What advice do you have for beginning writers?" And he said, "Don't do it."
Yeah.
He said, "If you do it, you are committing yourself to a life of loneliness, frustration, and poverty. And I do think there's something essentially there is something essentially true about that. My reading of The Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway's book, is that he's really trying to get across what it's like to write a novel, or how it feels to him to write a novel. And it's a guy sitting on a boat trying to catch a fish, and he's all by himself, and he hasn't caught a fish in, I think, like 28 days or something, and he's got like a crust of bread to eat. Like, this is really kind of what you're committing yourself to. And I think, I mean, I was talking about mainstream concepts of romantic love before, and I suppose I have a kind of knee-jerk reaction to mainstream concepts of being an artist, or chasing your dream, which again is something that's talked about a lot and is encouraged by television commercials and Taylor Swift and so on. And I think that can sort of trick us into thinking that the only chance we have of fulfillment is by becoming the artist that we always wanted to be. And I'm just not sold on that. I think there are lots of roads to being fulfilled. Like that wonderful film, Pixar film Soul, sort of goes into this, I think, really effectively, where it discusses the difference between the thing that a person can be passionate about, or that gives them their spark. It doesn't have to be the same as their purpose in life. Those things can be very much different, but as humans, we are often sort of conflating the two. So I find myself, I'm putting my personal experience aside, I find myself urging people to consider, is this the only path of fulfillment available to you? Because unless you're up for poverty, frustration, loneliness, and it's different with other media, filmmaking is very collaborative, so that's a different sort of thing. But certainly with writing, I think you're committing yourself to a series of sort of mental prisons. I'm sounding very curmudgeonly, aren't I? But you are committing to a series of mental prisons, which you have to sort of be willingly, to go and lock yourself in there every day. And unless you're willing to do that, I think don't be tricked into thinking that chasing your dreams of being an artist is the only way that you're going to have real meaning or real fun or real fulfillment. I think that's kind of a fallacy.
Okay. Andrea.
So, well, I'll pick up from where Zane left off and say, look, don't underestimate how hard it is. Like, it is going to be a really hard road. Having said that, if you're going to do it, I would say go do a whole bunch of courses. Like, if you're not already trained as a writer, places like your local Writers Centre, like Writers Victoria for us, or Writers Queensland, or whatever, the Australian Writers Centre, the Australian Society of Authors, and they all have amazing short courses that can just shortcut so many of the learnings that you have to do by yourself if you try to just struggle on your own. So I'd say 100% go off and do some courses. But then over and above any of that is, if you're going to write, just write, get words on the page. People get so strung up about trying to make everything perfect and editing as they're going that they just don't get past the first, 3 sentences. Like, just get words on the page. You can't edit a blank page. Once you've got it down, then you can fix it. And editing is a whole part of the writing process. And it'll, they often say that the book is made in the editing. So books can change enormously from first draft to what we actually read in the bookshop. So just get it down there, get that first draft going, and then worry about what to do next.
Love it.
Andrea, where can people find you online? Oh, sorry, Laurie, do you have one more question?
No, that was
yours.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. Okay.
So where do we find you?
I am, my website is andreabartonauthor.com, and all of my socials are Andrea Barton Author. That's Facebook or Instagram. LinkedIn, I'm just Andrea Barton. X is Andrea Barton AU. Can't get it that long. But yeah, that's it. So
beautiful.
I'm just on Instagram, Zane_Lovitt. That's it. I think there's some information on me on the text publishing website. And certainly they can tell you where to buy the books, which I think my Instagram account won't do. But if you want to see me, like, I don't know, at a festival or something, a photograph of me at a festival, you can go to my...
Andrea, just give a little plug for the Mansfield Writers Festival.
Yes, I will. So the Mansfield Readers and Writers Festival is in October on the 11th and 12th. That's a Saturday and Sunday. We have 2 days of events, panels. So mostly, 3 authors. So there is going to be a crime panel, which is probably going to be, so don't quote me on this, but at the moment we're looking at Solari Gentle, Margaret Hickey and Mark Smith. And I get to moderate. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, so we have probably 8 panels across the weekend and a couple of workshops. And on the Saturday night, we have an event that's not finalised yet, but that's going to be really cool on the Saturday night at, I'm not allowed to say where it is yet, but it'll be in a Mansfield venue. So yeah, so the program's not out yet, but we're about to start announcing our authors, and the program will be out soon. So.
Excellent. Well,
can I give a couple of plugs while you're doing
it?
Well, one of them might be too soon. It's the Williamstown Literary Festival, which is coming up next weekend. So that's on the 21st of June. I'm going to be doing a workshop there. So I think it's just for an hour or so, but doing a workshop on crime writing, like Crime Writing 101. Looking forward to that. There's also a festival called Words in Winter, which happens in Hepburn Springs.
Yes, it certainly does.
In August. Yep.
Yes.
And also the Port Fairy Writers Festival. I'm going to be down there and I believe that's September. So all very cold, all these very cold places in winter, but I suppose it would be. But yeah, that's what's coming up for me.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Laurie, what have we got? That's it.
Oh, I think that's it.
Yeah, we're a bit messy
we've
tonight, so
had
sorry, people.
such a night.
Yeah.
We've had such a night. Thank you for bearing with us.
Yep. So ready to remember to 1, 2, 3.
Read
more
Aussie
books.
Yeah, definitely. And then if everybody gets one of our books, we'll all get, at least $1.35 towards a cup of tea or coffee. All right. Thank you to Andrea Barton, whose most recent book is A Killer Among Friends. Thanks to Zane Lovitt. His most recent book is The Body Next Door. Please go out and have a look and get their stories. And you can see lots more on the website, of course. I think crime and romance are sort of neck and neck as to how many books in each genre on that page. We're really going like that. Lovely. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
for
you
now.
Let's meet again when magic happens.